Hey guys, how's it going? If you've been staying tuned to the channel for the past few weeks, you probably know by now that I've expressed that the month of April is National Poetry Month. You guys have probably seen all the videos that I posted up for my poetry lately, and I feel like this video should be made to sort of express what poetry means to me and how it's actually affected my life. Besides music, poetry is probably one of the most important things in my life, and it's not only helps express me, who I am as a person, but also helps me sort of try to get myself out there and try to have myself be known as myself and as an artist and as a person. And yeah, it's sort of crazy looking back on my poetry sort of history. I actually started writing poetry when I was in middle school. I never really thought about writing poetry, but I think it was because of like an 8th grade assignment, and I wrote a poem, and actually a lot of people liked it, and I sort of wrote a few poems here and there throughout that year, but I never really thought that, oh, this is something that I would sort of try to be known for or try to just use it as an art form. And honestly, the poems I wrote back then were actually sort of, very generic, sort of sappy love poetry and stuff like that. But yeah, since my 8th grade year, coming into my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I didn't really write a whole lot of poetry, at least nothing that I was proud of. It wasn't until sort of junior year that I started writing a bit more, but still wasn't to the extent of my senior year of high school, which is actually a really whole nother story in itself. So my senior year in high school, I sort of got involved in a few things here and there. I got involved in leadership, some other stuff, and one of them was actually a poetry club at my local high school. I heard over the intercom that they were having a meeting, and I was like, you know what? I think this would be a great sort of opportunity to at least try it out. So I went to a meeting, and my advisor, Mr. McElroy, and Mr. Mac, if you're seeing this, shout out to you for sort of sparking this passion in me of poetry. But yeah, when I joined the club, we decided to have sort of student poetry night that later semester, and that's when I sort of started writing more and actually getting into performing. And that's sort of the time I got into some of my favorite artists and poets, sort of like Hotel Books or Levi the Poet or Trey the Ruler, also known as Now Here. Those artists and those poets have really truly inspired the way I perform and the way I sort of read my poetry. And that sort of showed in that performance for that night, and I'll try to link it down below if I could find it. But that night, senior year, was my very first time ever reading poetry in front of a crowd. It was in our library, and they offered, all the English teachers offered extra credit, so it was packed, and I was super nervous. But I read it, and it was well received. My poetry advisor, who also sort of got involved in the Fresno slam poetry community, he really commended me and said that I should try to do this more and try to sort of enter slam poetry, which I have yet to do. Since then, I've written quite a few more poems. Some I've read here, and some that I'm still sort of working on. Actually, a lot I'm still working on. Also, looking back, it's sort of crazy to think about the progression of my writing. Since middle school, I remember knowing that my poems were probably no more than a page long and very generic middle school, 2-line rhymes and stuff like that. Going on to high school, I actually sort of strayed away from all the rhyming poetry and did completely free verse. And every single poem that I wrote my senior year were all free verses, and every sort of performance I did were all my free verse poems. And then progressing from that, now like starting college, listening to more poets and more artists, and sort of analyzing writing as a whole in general, has helped me sort of blend together both of those types of writing. And if you've heard my last few poems, you could tell that some lines I sort of rhyme, sometimes I don't, and I feel like it's more of a good flow in between them, and I'm more proud of my writing now than I've ever been in the past few years that I've been writing poetry. And like I said, besides music, poetry has grown to be one of the biggest things in my life right now, and I'm really glad about it. And that's sort of why I wanted to make this video, to express my love for poetry. And if you are sort of into it, if you're on the fence about it and you haven't started performing, and you're trying to write more, I encourage you to get into it. This sort of scene and this sort of environment, it's scary to get into. Performing what you've written and thought about, and probably put so much more emotion to it than you originally would show in your everyday life. It's scary. And even talking to the camera and reading my poetry to a camera, I get really nervous, and I try to memorize all my poems, even though I'm really bad at it. And to all those bigger names in poetry and spoken word, I commend you. You guys are one of my biggest inspirations to my writing and my performing, and hopefully someday I might be sort of noticed through that as well, if not anything else with music. And yeah, to those who have thought about performing, I highly recommend you to get into it, because there's nothing more satisfying than reading your poetry and hearing a response, and hearing the claps and snaps, and people who hear that one line that you felt that was really good, and people react to that line, and you hear the crowd, and you hear the people reacting to your poetry. It's one of the most satisfying things I've ever encountered in my life. So yeah, hopefully some of you who write poetry have been a little bit more inspired. I will try to upload more poetry to the channel. I know I've only started uploading more this month in celebration of National Poetry Month, and I'll try my best to write and upload more. I know I have some that I'm excited to write, finish up writing, and upload and memorize. So yeah, stay tuned. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.